The storm is close. It evolves on the axis of foreknown devastation. Every perceptual dream has liquefied into a scarlet mist, coated with the gloom of legends. A disjunction between truth and judgment eats away at your soul, disturbing your moral focus when it matters most. Nature is restless. The children of the night are plucking out their eyes, tearing open their own throats. A marching order of sin consume everything in their path, pulverizing the earth with blind wrath. Will sleep soon, wake tomorrow, and the nightmare shall remain, imposing their sublime power and trivializing our mortal life. This force calls to be explained. None are more eager than the harbingers of avarice, those who hold to tenet and create not for their own sake, but instead for reasons cloaked in endless self-delusion. What can be described as divine punishment may be investigated as an alchemical fascination. Here the monsters force our philosophies into action, to stand for these beliefs. The time for contemplation is past. Aristotle held that contemplation made ethics as activity complete. We say that temporal ordering can be turned against us, and, unlike Aristotle, we posit that even the thoughtless brute may become moral. We say against Augustine and Meister Eckhart that the empty spot left in our souls, post-divine revelation, is not filled by God, but the essence of value itself. Spiritual experiences, as a master category of aesthetic experiences, are sui generis. They are not the domain of otherworldly forces possessing unique causal power. My soul was weak within me. Dragon Age origins found me at a turning point in life. 14 years old and politically committed to truancy, to cement my claim to eminent domain, I was lost in an anxious push of legal threats against my being. Here I felt the pull of anarchy, which I now conceive as the omega point of humanity, our final moment of shining radiance and evermost perfection. I sought to liberate Chardon from sadism and from theology. I've always been cognizant of this on some level. To quote Zhuangzi, heaven and earth were born at the same time that I was, and the 10,000 things are one with me. What Tao is conceived as the way, Plato correctly recognized as the good. No goal has ever illuminated my path, save for fighting injustice, throwing myself into the feeding frenzy, sacrificing my health on a vampiric altar. All that occupied my soul was the understanding that nothing about our social order was just. As the Chantry says, blessed are the peacekeepers, the champions of the just. They would christen the Templars, an order of knights sworn to protect the realm from unsanctioned mages, with such an ennobled title. One of the origin stories focuses on the Circle of Magi, and this is only too appropriate. We see firsthand the regimentation and severe regulation enacted by a world afraid of potential and power. Since mages are susceptible to demonic possession and dark arts like blood magic, the Chantry and the Templars latch onto this justification for their imprisonment, functioning as pseudo-academic circles from which they cannot escape. As some mages would argue, the masses' fear of other people should concern them not, as there are many apostates who avoid these practices. The once imperialistic nation of Deventer is ruled by mages, but the world fails to end. Yet here is where the Grey Wardens, our principal faction, find their advantage. To right the wrongs of warring factions, they try, and certainly fail, to transcend political disputes, having the all-encompassing other to fight, the Darkspawn. Darkspawn are a red flag for what we're getting into. A mass of Tolkienized fiction, with the world-building complexity of the Wheel of Time, and the grit of A Song of Ice and Fire combined into one. The 90s are singing. And the Darkspawn hear this call, bound as they are to the tune of the old gods, filling their heads with euphoria and purpose after centuries of mindless wandering. When the soul of an old god is found, another blight is born. From the deep roads, a great horde pours out and taints the land upon which it marches. Using this end-of-the-world threat as a backdrop, Dragon Age Origins takes time to breathe through its companions and microcosmic political struggles. One such character is Morrigan. A pseudo-Nietzschean and nearly feral child, she scratches a humble living in the swamps, under the care of her undying mother, Flemeth, who speaks in cryptic tones, calling to mind Kreia from Knights of the Old Republic 2. It is not unusual for BioWare games to take indirect inspiration from the Obsidian follow-up to their breakthrough game. Their approach to moral themes fundamentally changed post-launch, doing away with cheese villains like Malik from Knights of the Old Republic 1, introducing assimilationist pragmatists like Saren from Mass Effect, or in the current case, misguided nationalists like Loghain. Morrigan is the beating heart of the story, though this will not be evident until the Witch Hunt DLC, but Loghain defines its spirit. Thus we will attend to Geist first and foremost. We meet Loghain under grim circumstances. No matter which origin story we choose, all roads lead to Ostagar, a bastion for our contemporary skirmish against the Third Blight. King Kaelin is sympathetic to the Grey Wardens, even privileges them, but Loghain is skeptical, and with good reason. The Grey Wardens are a secretive order. They insist that they are necessary to end a blight, yet do not provide the slightest hint as to why. For those with keen political minds, or traumatized interpersonal senses, this is a transparent power grab. Meeting Alistair and Wynne along the way, Andrastian faithful that we shall attend to later, the plotline will spread to all four corners of Thedos, here from Ostagar, just as the Blight threatens to do the same. The long night is far from over. The armies fielded by King Kaelin and Sir Taran Loghain are insufficient to stem the tide. Loghain refuses to acquiesce to aid from neighboring Orlais, who brutally occupied Ferelden half a century ago. Meanwhile, Kaelin is impatient and childish, obsessed with delusions of honor and glory, to defeat the Blight and decapitate the mighty archdemon, side by side with the Grey Wardens of old. As a result, Loghain makes the executive decision to abandon Kaelin in his last stand, endeavoring to expel the Wardens and unite the realm under his banner, one that will not invite foreign powers like Orlais, nor make tactical decisions based on fairy tales, as King Kaelin would have it. He makes a pact with blood mages from the Circle of Magi to ensure support from sympathetic and power-hungry factions. He plans to cleanse the alienage in Denerim of its downtrodden and elven citizens, forging a contract with Tevinter to expedite the process by selling them into slavery. The Jarl of Redcliffe, Eamon, lays poison by his hands. Although his decision at Ostagar have legitimate reasons of state, his plans orchestrated around that are less understandable. Relative isolation and the poisonous words of Rendon Howe explain this decision. The low-grade psychosis delivered by solitude prevents many stopgap measures to sobriety and sanity. As such, his words carry the indignation of a tyrant, forever unable to distinguish between his interests and national health. It is only appropriate that Simon Templeman is the voice actor for Loghain. Well known for his portrayal of Cain in the Legacy of Cain series, we can attend to our harmonious Soul Reaver 1 quote as a means of understanding Loghain.
Conscience? You dare to speak to me of conscience? Only when you have felt the full gravity of choice should you dare question my judgment. Your lifespan is a flicker compared to the mass of doubt and regret that I have borne since Mortanius first turned me from the light. To know that the fate of the world hangs dependent on the advisedness of my every deed? Can you even begin to conceive what action you would take in my position?
Now let us compare and contrast Cain with Loghain in this scene.
Traitors! Which of you stood against the Orlesian Emperor when his troops flattened your fields and raped your wives? You fought with us once, Eamon. You cared about this land once, before you got too old and fat and content to even see what you risk. None of you deserve a say in what happens here. None of you have spilled blood for this land the way I have. How dare you judge me?
Such an indignant and self-assured confidence is necessary for a tyrant to maneuver the world as they do, repelling constant signs of falsification, carving a path through the opposition, quieting their conscience, and possessing calm in their right. Chasing the shadow of Loghain defines much of the game. When Flemeth rescues our party from the Tower of Ashal, she sends the bird away from her nest, forcing Morrigan to travel with us. Her character arc mirrors the monomythic coming of age that shapes our warden. We see Morrigan grow up as Ferelden loses its innocence to the Blight. Her contact with wider civilization has been so far rare and infrequent. As such, her inclinations are sociopathic and untamed. Morrigan carries a curious and unusual idea of freedom. On one hand, she sees that mage oppression is unjust, and does not hold that people should be regimented to abate the fear of the neurotic common man. On the other hand, she has no objection to letting the Templars purge the disunified mages of the Circle, seeing them as cattle who all but ask to be slaughtered.
You want us to assist this preachy schoolmistress to rescue these pathetic excuses for mages? They allow themselves to be corralled like cattle, mindless. Now their masters have chosen death for them, and I say, let them have it. I could be here had my mother not shielded me from the Templars, so I am to show sympathy. My mother often said that things are the way they are because they could not have been any other way. I always questioned this. Do what you wish. I care not.
There's the vivid proposition that people must deserve and earn their freedom. They must fight for it. As a character loosely inspired by Nietzsche, this is not exactly inappropriate. Observing Nietzsche's attitude toward liberalism in Twilight of the Idols, the value of a thing sometimes does not lie in what one attains by it, but in what one pays for it, what it costs us. Liberal institutions cease to be liberal as soon as they are attained. Later on, there are no worse and no more thorough injurers of freedom than liberal institutions. These same institutions produce quite different effects when they are still being fought for. Then they really promote freedom in a powerful way. For what is freedom? That one has the will to assume responsibility for oneself, that one maintains the distance that separates us, that one becomes indifferent to difficulties, hardships, privation, even to life itself, that one is prepared to sacrifice human beings for one's cause, not excluding oneself. The free man is a warrior. Common to fantasy fiction, particularly as implemented in video games with RPG stat systems, is the notion that conflict is the primary catalyst for spiritual growth. They are thus profoundly Nietzschean. It is through intense suffering and endless trials that we find ourselves. We are witnessing the products of a culture that has yet to narrate everything as a metastatic consequence of trauma, the neo-psychoanalytic reduction of every problem to traumatic stress. Even just a few decades ago, it was typical to see violence and struggle as beautifying forces, trials that benefit us more than they harm us. For a culture increasingly averse to conflict, such ideals are only timely. This conflict is not just physical. The competition between disparate values is emphasized as well. Our ideals must enter public life and survive ruthless critique. So comes the relevance of Sten. A representative of an authoritarian and caste-based culture, all are comforted by the certainty of the Qun. Everyone has their place, every function a unitary expression. We meet Sten imprisoned in Lothering, not long before its scouring by the Darkspawn hordes. Having panicked after losing his sword, without which he would be deemed spiritually worthless in Parvolan, he killed an entire family, children included, in a blind frenzy. Needing all the help we can recruit to fight the Darkspawn and unite the realm against Loghain, we can convince the local chantry to secure his release. Sten reminds us of a time when BioWare companions were not sock puppets for the player. He will initially refuse to answer our questions, offering the blunt "no," standing before us as a truly alien creature. Should the player character be a woman, he will make his misogynistic and strict beliefs clear, that women are not made to be warriors, and no Qunari would recognize such a status.
I don't understand. You look like a woman. You are a Grey Warden, so it follows that you can't be a woman. Women are priests, artisans, shopkeepers, or farmers. They don't fight. The laborers, soldiers, and Ashkari are men. There is nothing else left. What does that have to do with anything? No one gets to choose who they are. Of course not. It is who I am. That's not up to me. A person is born, Qunari or human or elven or dwarf. He doesn't choose that. The size of his hands, whether he is clever or foolish, the land he comes from, the color of his hair, these are beyond his control. We do not choose, we simply are. Can they? We'll see.
His questions about the Blight and our mission are pressing and blunt. He will even try to take over the party amidst your search for the urn of sacred ashes. Most companion characters can be killed or alienated from the party. Dragon Age Origins does not emphasize normie fun time with friends, instead schizophrenic relationships with fellow survivors, united by necessity and shared interests. Mutual suspicion is abound, trust is rare, participating in a paranoid atmosphere between companions, not seen since Knights of the Old Republic 2.
The Blight. How will you end it? If you hope to slay the Archdemon with wit, you may want to arm yourself first. You say you are a Grey Warden. I have heard stories of this order. Great strategists and peerless warriors. That is what we hear of the Wardens. So far, I am not impressed. Will you make that excuse to the Archdemon, or the victims it claims in the meantime?
If we trace a semicircle back from Sten's position, we will meet the traveling minstrel, Leliana, who crystallizes core religious themes echoing throughout the series. Here we approach the myth of disenchantment. That's a book I am #plagiarizing, by the way. The secular world is not a disenchanted and lifeless barren free from mystical experience and otherworldly beings. It has replaced Abrahamic monotheism with the cacophony of demons, spirits, and ethical concepts expressed in our art. Yet these monotheistic currents resonate with us still, allowing us to, in the case of Dragon Age, use Catholic ascetics as stand-ins for the sense of awe and divine presence that their institutions inspire. Leliana thus speaks to strong Catholic undercurrents, representing a unified chantry that, while having experienced the schism in Tevinter, has not met its equivalent Protestant movement. The close resemblance to real-world Christianity helps us feel home-like being in the Dragon Age world. The colonial themes of oppressed indigenous populations, the prevalence of a popular monotheism, the disappearance and erasure of broadly pagan traditions, all of these find familiar resonance in the last millennium. Through engaging fantasy fiction, we can process this history in a possibility space with relaxed norms. For example, it is politically sensitive to portray indigenous people any such way, but disenchanted elves can fulfill their functional role just fine. We are free from the reflexive judgments of vengeful scolds. Here we confront a fairly surface-level take on faith. Leliana is an unusual Andrastian. She believes she hears the voice of the Maker, despite chantry doctrine declaring it impossible, that the Maker has turned his back on us. Carrying a pseudo-Protestant but nonetheless loyal spirit within her, perhaps literally, spirits of faith are known to attenuate the religious impulses of their subjects. Leliana walks an empty road as a divided soul. Home to Orlais, she was raised into a life of extravagance and scandal. Playing the duplicitous Orlesian game, she once delighted in wielding arbitrary power over people. Having been cast aside by her closest partner in avarice, she heard the Maker speak to her, seeking shelter in the chantry of Ferelden. Thus we see how organized religious structures prey on the vulnerable. As any real-world churchgoer will admit to you, they recruit from the desperate and the lost, holding that on one hand, it is good that they see the truth, but acknowledging the predatory relationship involved. Leliana is a materialistic hedonist by heart, and the game asks whether this spiritual change is meaningful. Her companion quest, tracking down her old mentor, Marjolaine, who makes an attempt on her life, can involve the possibility of hardening Leliana, synthesizing these two aspects once more. Dragon Age Inquisition would lean toward this hardened Leliana, regardless of player choice, her faith wavering in the light of the world set ablaze.
What we're doing, what we've done, hunted men down, killed them. Part of me loves it. It invigorates me, and this scares me. I feel myself slipping.
And the smoke pits of war shall darken the skies, and our hearts shall burn. What say we to a world that runs on little but profound suffering? Could existence be in need of justification? Not just theistic entities like an omnibenevolent creator? Yet to understand the first case, we must address the second. Using Leliana as our foil, we consider how she would encounter the problem of evil. We will use generic theism as her stand-in. The failures and insufficiencies of the theistic answer gives light to the atheistic case. The problem of evil has a meme-worthy reputation thanks to new atheist discourse surrounding it, but one should see the problem of evil as an existential and cultural phenomenon, not merely an argument against tri-omni monotheism, but as our encounter with axiological atheism. Axiological atheism is the notion that moral facts are necessarily secular. As history progresses, we intuitively feel that the good is beyond being, that moral properties cannot be reduced to divine properties, even that divine aseity is in tension with moral realism. Using the evidential argument from evil, which relies on a probabilistic inference from the disproportionate distribution of evils in the world, we can conclude that it is extremely unlikely that the tri-omni monotheistic deity exists. And if we deny omnibenevolence in order to save some sense of God, it becomes hard to see what is religiously important about this concept of God. There's no compelling motivation to believe it. And what say we to nature? Eric Steinhardt attends to this problem, inspired by Nietzsche baptizing nature as holy enough to redeem gratuitous suffering. The providential forces in our universe brought our species into existence, and they will likewise drive it into extinction. Nature cares about value. It does not care about humanity or any other species. All things, including all living things, are laid out by the One on an evolutionary altar. As they bear witness to the good, they are consumed by the fire of time, but they will be reborn. Since the teleological forces of nature are non-mentalistic and non-agential, and since morality is extra-agential, nature does not require its own theodicy. As axiological atheists, we do not have to apologize for a cruel reality. We instead know that evaluative facts about cruelty obtain. When you no longer try to ground morality in a mindful being, with human-like properties such as love, we gain one advantage. We can recognize evil as gratuitous evil, badness as a primitive bad, suffering as irredeemable suffering. We no longer need to gaslight ourselves. We say against Leibniz, and against Eric Steinhardt as well, that all is not for the best. In companion with Voltaire's Candide, we see our lives as gardens to nurture and protect, not as imminent expressions of what is maximally valuable. The world can be a revolting graveyard, but there are campfires in the darkness. Quite fortunately, ascetic facts about life exist. We say with Nietzsche that life is justified as an ascetic phenomenon. We are dramatic play actors dancing across the cosmic stage. Even our tragedies are beautiful. It is exquisite to suffer and decay. Such an attitude was dubbed by Nietzsche as Dionysian pessimism, which recognizes the goodness inherent to the frenzy and fury of a tragic reality, but does not lie about it. Whereas Eric Steinhardt emphasizes that the world grows toward the good, but is not tailored for us psychologically, we simply say that there is little correspondence between nature and morality. Once again, the good is beyond being. Evaluation is prior to existential quantification. Even simple questions like, is being itself good, have evaluative answers, and moral facts, conceived as states of affairs that necessarily obtain, draw from this mystical normative essence. We say with Derek Parfait that the ontological capture of moral facts is besides the point, but claim against him that an inflationary metaphysics appropriately resembles the mystical good. As such, we are rationalists and we are also mystics. Philosophy and religion constitute a way of life, though they are not merely ways of life. We still require robust metaphysical commitments. What naturalists consider unparsimonious is irrelevant to us, not to mention question-begging on their part. Moving on from the negative sense of naturalism, the Darkspawn tests our faith in nature, just as figures like Wynne, Alistair, and Leliana find their faith in the Maker challenged. This religious encounter with brutality is but spiritual fuel, an obstacle against which to test ourselves. As terrible as the blight may be, there is redemptive noblesse in a morally great order of wardens flirting with pseudo-utilitarian pragmatism, scorning typical social norms such as the prejudice against blood magic, shining against traditional values in the name of ruthless appreciation of reality. Early into the game, we face the secretive joining ritual, perhaps the darkest scene BioWare has ever put to script.
Davith, step forward.
The Grey Wardens must take the tainted blood of the Darkspawn into themselves, and thus achieve connectivity with their madness. Should an archdemon be on the rise, as is the case during a blight, the Wardens will hear its seductive call. The connection is omnidirectional, however. Grey Wardens can sense nearby Darkspawn as an extra perceptive ability, but so too can the Darkspawn track Wardens. This imbuing of corruption to overcome corruption, embracing the darkness in order to conquer it, finds resonance with anti-Manichaean themes recurring throughout history. As atheo-religious practitioners, we deem this manifestly agreeable. Our encounter with being in the world can be frightening and sickening, but we don't need to redefine being in light of its negative properties. We instead appreciate the Nietzschean drama. As Disturbed would note in the existentialist song Fear, we don't need to change that really. I kind of like it ugly. How does a figure like Wynne fare in comparison? She clings to hope, a misguided hope rooted in conceptual confusion. Here's why philosophy was traditionally conceived as a way of life. While philosophical concerns should not be reduced to concerns about living a good life, they can be highly informative for that purpose. Wynne incorrectly believes that religious value depends on the existence of the Maker. Notions such as the immortality of the soul, the afterlife, and morality are, for her, bound up with the Maker. As Eric Steinhardt would argue, she is the victim of Twilight theism. Twilight theism binds us to theistic if-then chains. For example, it tells us, if God does not exist, then moral facts do not exist. Yet this inference is clearly false. These are not just erroneous chains of reasoning, but they literally bind us to Twilight theology. They limit us. They prevent us from achieving self-actualization. Wynne is a wise and interesting woman, but she represents an unfortunate case of indoctrination. This is why religion needs to be liberated from theism. It is why we promote atheo-paganism, to provide robust alternatives to these theistic distortions, and ultimately to save our souls. For Wynne, her constrained religious views are the result of a pragmatic take on life, that is, more specifically, an assimilationist mindset. She has given into the circle of magi, for example, accepting the ideology that mages need to be regimented and regulated by the Templars and the Chantry. Existing as a stark contrast to Morrigan, who champions Nietzschean excellence, that the fear of masses should not hinder her potential, she represents a traditional exemplar of maturity, that is, learning to accept established institutions and customs. This conservative understanding of maturity is misguided and problematical. It fails to explain cross-cultural growth, where the customs and institutions of a people differ, but the arc of wisdom converges on a similar telos. And it cannot model the future where, say, the establishment 500 years from now would look very different from today. This concept of maturity fails to prepare us for the future. Of course, it cannot cope with counterfactual concerns either. We could imagine an alternative history where Stalinism took over Europe and lasted several centuries. Would maturity then become conformity and acceptance with a regime of brutal murder? No. Maturity is not acquiescence to contingent norms of society. It is good to grow in ways conducive to your well-being and evolving understanding of the world. Acceptance with your place in life has little to do with that. As for Alistair, we glimpse into an irresponsible and cowardly take on these matters. For Alistair, there is the sense that it is easier to believe in the Maker, to pay homage to the Order of Templars, which he nearly joined, treading the path of least resistance. By counter-example, it clarifies the bravery required to stake out individualism and freedom in a world so hostile to autonomous personhood. Alistair is suggestive to manipulation, easily offended, as Morrigan's poking and prodding of him suggests. It is exactly the kind of quiet and complacent being that authoritarian social orders desire. As a result, we witness the degenerate aspects of authority. We have a vested interest in upending these customs. They prevent our ascent to higher states of health. Using the terms of contemporary theurgy, they prevent us from becoming divine. In the cultural sense, The Maker thus limits us from ascending into godlike bodies. We say with Cybreed, the celestial scion shines upon the universe frame. Exemplifying the all-too-Christian failure mode is Alistair's inability to let go of vengeance. Toward the end of the game, after the Landsmeet has proceeded, we can choose to spare Loghain and induct him into the Wardens. He is a valuable commander. His experience and intelligence count for much. For Alistair, that is simply not good enough. He would rather relinquish his life or go into exile than see a guilty man go free. Of course, should you have hardened his character with the right influence, convincing him to abandon his money-grubbing sister entirely, he will cynically leave the Wardens. All the same, his propensity to disillusionment speaks volumes. As for Leliana, we learn an important fact. Only through suffering, only with a sufficient degree of cynicism can we treat other people with appropriate care and distance. If we dissociate ourselves from the wrath of others, we can learn to forgive them. We no longer become as involved in our own traumas. Although it is a tiresome trope to see traditional religion as some opiate of the masses, we can note that certain religious structures inappropriately prepare us for the horror and disappointment of reality. Instead of internalizing Stoic or Taoistic wisdom and acceptance, we rage against uncontrollable realities, expecting some correction down the line, be it through natural karma or some judgmental afterlife. And such is woven into their mythos. It is said that once ancient Tevinter magisters breached the Fade and gazed upon the seat of the Maker, that the Golden City was corrupted by their presence. As Corypheus from Inquisition would later tell us, the corruption was already present upon his arrival. Typical of secular media is the paranoid tension that Western religious myths are false, giving disproportionate credence to Eastern and alternative spiritual systems. As a result, we start to see that the mythos of the Dalish elves bear more resemblance to reality than stand in Catholicism per the Chantry. Such is a necessary phase of our era. As belief in theism declines, ghosts, spirits, and private mysticism fill up the vacuum. Yet we don't need to replace myth with secularized myth. We can do philosophy in its place. We say against Genesis that the Tower of Babel is the crowning achievement of sapient kind, that human pride is not arrogance. Technology is a generic good, even as it can be twisted into evil ends. It is morally inappropriate for our ethics to discourage innovation. We will pollute the skies with slices of holy radiance, as avatars of being. We reject parallels between industry and elemental evil portrayed in Tolkienized fiction. Early Heidegger was correct to speculate that there is an intimate connection between being and beings. Just as we built furnaces to light the flames of industry, we will animate the stars to give voice to the cosmos. The cosmos silently tells us to achieve perfection, and we form words in resonance with that proposition. What does it look like when Dragon Age drifts away from orientalizing the Occident, when it is faced with an existential crisis pertaining to whether there should be a sequel at all? It may bear similarity to the expansion pack, Awakening. Here we see a deeper dive into the eternal structure of its lore, no longer beholden to extrinsic and cultural references. Having slain the Archdemon and cast down the Third Blight, the Darkspawn still exist as isolated skirmishers. Moreover, the Darkspawn are exhibiting new behaviors, manifesting more and more intelligent creatures, organizing into complicated social structures. The Darkspawn are not some mindless other after all. Moving even farther away from Western religious myth, we drown ourselves in modernist pluralism. Here we draw upon political history and impose them on our fictions. Rather than lead the Darkspawn as a homogeneous threat, they are divided amongst themselves. They have their own balance of interests, their own competing ideals. They are humanized. It is the world breaking free from the tropified and static roles that defined the original game. The dynamism of a breathing reality gives them new life in turn. To live is to change. Only forms and dead things stay unchanging. Having seen the Wardens critiqued as a politically neutral force in the Soldier's Peak DLC, where the Wardens once turned to blood magic to defy a Ferelden tyrant, we now manage the city of Amaranthine and the lands left behind by the late Brendan Howe. This is a mechanic that would later be central to the third title, Inquisition, but Awakening is less interested in inducing childish power fantasies. In its place, Awakening seems to ask legitimate questions of state. The nobles all have their schemes and duplicitous interests. The merchants are a class distinct from the rural peasants. Feudalism is abound. It is interesting to see Dragon Age ask political questions internal to its own era, where, qua feudalism, some prioritization against the three classes must be made. Rather than driving home a liberal critique of this pre-capitalist system, we are in the midst of it. There is no magical button to abolish the monarchy, no privatization of aristocratic states on the table. We have to experience what it is like to manage an age of mercantilism and arbitrary privilege, whether we like it or not. For my part, I privilege the city of Amaranthine over all other interests, for I am a committed urbanist. When it comes to Thedas, institutional hierarchies reflect celestial hierarchies, just as they did for Pseudo-Dionysus. Here we may comment on the awkward relationship between politics and metaphysics. These two fields have increasingly divorced from each other over time, but once commingled spectacularly. From Plato to Augustine to Hegel, metaphysics functioned as what we might call the first politics. Contemporaries like Alexander Dugin bridged this divide, particularly in his book Political Platonism. For Dugin, the social order should represent the hierarchical chain of being. Just as he prioritizes the one over the many, he sees the state as a unifying one which takes precedence over the many. He views the many as democratic degeneration, a sickness to be violently cast out. It should be noted that political Platonism is reactionary drivel, yet it represents an old and quaint spirit that we may want to revisit. It was common for people with sophisticated political opinions to ground their views in fundamentalities and ultimates, claims that spoke to the nature of reality, or at least produced grand and controversial ethical theories. Our technocratic society has entered an intellectual dark age in this precise sense. What Frank Herbert decried as the decline of generalists, we see as public reason turned against itself. Public reason was once a liberal concept. It demands that power provide legible and non-arbitrary reasons for its exercise. Can it still be a liberal notion? It may seem that public reason has become a mechanism for arbitrary power, rather than an effective constraint therein. Echoing the sophists, correctly or incorrectly derided by Greek's finest and most autistic philosophers, they input contingent reasons that the public accepts, then output a quasi-utilitarian optimization for that concern. They are involved in rationalization, more than they are involved in reason per se. Sophists were the original dialecticians, and technocrats only render its dark side with violent luminosity. When it comes to interacting with party companions, we fulfill the role of sophists, as positively and negatively balanced. We must take the priors of our companions as more or less given. Rather than construct our own foundations and epistemae, we dialogue with these people, performing imminent critiques of their value systems insofar as we want to influence them, as vividly seen in the companion hardening dynamic we've already encountered. You might anticipate that this practical meeting of divergent value systems has something to do with the Darkspawn factionalizing among themselves, and if so, you would be correct. The Darkspawn threaten Amaranthine not for reasons of random skirmishes. They are led by a broodmother in delirium. Cut off from the calling, the mother faces the crisis of existential insecurity. Preferring the seductive music of an authority figure, she exhibits the nausea defined by Camus, or rather, Sartre, but Sartre's notion of nausea finds common purchase with Camus' emphasis on absurdity. Unlike the existentialist, however, she yearns for her chains, a truly contemptible figure, at least from a liberal point of view. Here we face an unfortunate fact. Some people will side with tyranny, against all reason, even in betrayal of themselves. When such an intractable conflict of interest arises, then and only then is the extermination of those who forsake freedom conscionable. George R.R. Martin constructed his series, A Song of Ice and Fire, as partially motivated by the following question. What remained of the orcs from Mordor? Were they hunted into extinction, even the docile and innocent-seeming orcs? He faced just such a similar crisis of conscience with the Darkspawn. And who was the author of their rude awakening? An intelligent magister simply named the Architect. Here we see internal evidence that this expansion was the siren song of the series. The blight, it seems, can be overcome with alchemical reciprocation. As he says,
"In order to become what you are, you drink the blood of my kind. To transform, similarly, we must transform. I have created a version of your joining that uses the blood of Grey Wardens. You take the taint into yourself. What we take is your resistance. That is how my brethren are freed. In your blood lies the key to their immunity against the call of the old gods."
This harmony with degeneration personified thus defines a dark and ugly transhumanism. Typical of post-human literature is to conceive of ascension as something divine, beautiful, perfect. As Cybrid would have it, "Inertial I'm floating now, compressing gravity. I'm moving in the perfect sphere of the creation divine." The architect threatens to inverse that. Should we embrace it? There are practical considerations in favor of it. No alternative to the blight is forthcoming, and each blight scars the land, harming darkspawn and non-darkspawn alike. As we grow to understand each other, a biological synthesis shines on the horizon. Eternal harmony with grit and pestilence, sublating itself into health. Yes, the architect proposes a fine solution indeed. We can imagine, then, the Dragon Age lore being tied into a neat bow. The mysteries remain as they are, mysterious, not meant to be degraded in the telling. The Darkspawn learn and evolve. Centuries pass. Empires rise and fall. Our greatest creations crumble and rust for those centuries. All of this repeats in an endless cycle of creative destruction. Is it not beautiful? Yet we must attend to finalizing matters. The earth is rumbling with the promise of fortune untold. It is a time of chaos and change. This is the final message that the Witch Hunt DLC communicates, centered around hunting Morrigan, catching her just before she steps into the first Illuvian mirror known to the age. The Illuvian mirrors connect a network beyond the earthly world and beyond the Fade. All interdependent in their own realm, but the earthly node points are shattered. We are warned about Flemeth and the abyss she carries with her. The Elvish lore starts to cannibalize the Dragon Age setting itself. The seeds of future titles are all contained in microcosms in these premium modules, existing as they did with an ambiguous attitude toward its own future. We end with Flux, the hair-cladding conclusion that no body of water is stepped in twice, or in the dramatic perceptions of Ludwig Klages, a pandemonium of contingency that defies contemporary mathematical and logical modeling. We end on a note of existential anxiety, just as the Mother and other maladapted creatures began their sour destinies. How might we respond in this atheo-pagan meditation? We say against Taoists that there are static facts about being, the world is not reduced to an endless flow, and we contradict Spinozian necessitarians by saying the actual world is one among many possible worlds. We again find companionship with Nietzsche by welcoming tragedy and chaos as beautifying factors, every event of suffering adds drama to our lives, but we reject Nietzsche in his embracement of a radical contingency. We affirm with Morrigan that change and disruption can be a mechanism of finding freedom. Those who fear nomadic randomness are not just victims of change, they are victims to their own psychological disharmonies. We can combat existential nausea with rational meditation, that is, meditative practices cognitively threaded along quasi-stoic lines. One can interpret this video essay as a self-therapeutic form of rational meditation. What is valuable about meditation is commensurable with what is valuable about even base and hedonistic activities. That moment of perfect unity between your consciousness and its object, when worries dissolve and the ego dissolves into harmony with the environment. That moment of pure attentiveness, without the weight of memory to bring it down. We can achieve such states not only with actual Buddhistic meditation, but by entering flow states. Even mundane labor at a minimum wage job can, with the right psychological orientation, enter a person into these desirable flow states. It is through phenomenological forgetting, that is, discarding all that haunts you without running away from it, that we can enjoy what little our life-forward gardens produce. When we do philosophy, when we consume an engaging piece of art, when we pray, and when we reach peak intensity of gymnastic exercise, we achieve non-cognitive unity with nature. We cease to be alienated and burdened with ourselves. We overcome phenomenological selfhood, the felt sense that all experiences are witnessed by a distinct subject of experience. While this is true as a metaphysical fact of belonging, we possess our own experiences, it is not a particular fact of experience. One may have an experience that is absent of subject. This explains mystical states that people can enter during psychedelic experiences and even ordinary moments of total immersion. You may have experienced these particular states yourself, even while playing a simple video game. There comes a point where, with total mechanical and strategic immersion, we can lose ourselves into the experience. We become identical to our button presses and visual pattern recognition. We fall into the gaming experience. So our conclusion is twofold. On a narrative and philosophical level, Dragon Age Origins is a means of reenchanting culture by exploring religious systems as aesthetically vitalizing myth. On a kinesthetic and physiological level, Dragon Age Origins, like any video game, can help us understand mystical experience and the religious value of appreciating nature therein. Yes, as Nietzsche said, existence is holy enough to redeem even the most gruesome suffering. I would like to end our textual ritual with an obligatory thanks to those who have supported me throughout this endeavor, to people such as Sarah Neste, Epingur, Gustav Schiel, Effie Rue, Palomar, Fall from Space, Thanatus, Rania Hale, Joachim, No Name, and those who explicitly remained anonymous, and everyone else who has helped me throughout the years.
These apparitions torment me. Has this all been foretold?